Okay, we'll be looking at the structure of the bacteriophage. Bacteriophage, or phage for short, are viruses that specifically infect bacteria. So they are kind of harmless to us by only infecting the bacteria. So on the screen now is the typical structure of a bacteriophage. There are different kinds of bacteriophages, and they do differ slightly in their structures. But by default, this is the most common structure. So for the bacteriophages, right, most of them, if not all, will have this head, right, or known as capsid head. Right, then inside the capsid head would be the linear double-stranded DNA. Okay, so all bacteriophages have DNA as their viral genome, and almost all of them, the DNA are is double-stranded and linear in shape. Right, so not circular, linear DNA. Then there's a tail portion under the head. So both the head and tails are formed by proteins, right? Mostly capsomeres. Right? So simplistically, you can call the whole thing the capsid coat in a sense. But of course, the capsid head is more like a capsid coat than with an extra tail structure. Okay. Then the tail contains a few parts as well. There's the contractile sheath on the outside, which function to contract, and you will see what that does later when we look at the reproductive cycle of the bacteriophage. Inside the tail, right, that you can't see here, inside the tail is actually a hollow tube, right? So once the contractile sheath contracts, right, the hollow tube will be pushed out. Okay, again, you will see that when we look at the reproductive cycle. Below, there's a base plate, and most bacteriophages have got tail fibers that comes out from the base plate or close to the base plate. So that would be a typical structure of the bacteriophage. There are a bit more details. Right, so the head, capsid coat, composed of capsomeres, same as the other capsid coats in the other viruses. Contain again the viral genome being linear double-stranded DNA. Tail also proteins, So hollow tube you can't see. That's for entry of DNA. Again, you will see that when we look at the reproductive cycle. Then the contractile sheath, base plate, and tail fibers as mentioned. Right. The base plate and tail fibers function to bind to receptors to attach to the host cell. Okay. Again, we'll see this in the reproductive cycle. Okay. So in your syllabus, there are two phages that are more important. Because if you look at the learning outcome, there are two types of reproductive cycles with bacteriophages. We have the lytic cycle and the lytic and lysogenic cycle. Right, the Lambda bacteriophage is specifically mentioned in the learning outcome because it is the example that make use of both the lytic and lysogenic cycle. But for the lytic cycle only, T4 is the usual example. Right? That's why we want to introduce the T4 as well. And T4 contains the more default structure of the bacteriophage. So T4 also quite important, even though the name is not mentioned in the learning outcome. Alright. So in terms of structure, right, the T4 and the Lambda phages differs really by the presence of the numbers of tail fibers. Right, the Lambda phage only contain one very short tail fiber as a detail. Another difference is the T4 phage are one of the larger phages as well. Lambda is a bit smaller. But all these are small details that you don't need to memorize by heart. In terms of the description of the different kinds of phages, the T4 phage and any other phages that only reproduce by lytic cycle are known as virulent phage. Right, while those phages, example Lambda, that reproduce by both the lytic and lysogenic cycle, these phages are described as temperate phages. So once you see the word virulent versus temperate, you also should be able to tell which reproductive cycles they make use of. Okay.